Okay, so now we're going to look at how we handle items that have lumps, bumps, and fuzz, or nap. So this is, you can see I put this in the hoop, and it's a waffle weave towel, and it would be really fun to embroider. The biggest issue with it is that if we don't control the divots, your embroidery is going to kind of be going up and down, and it's not going to look as neat and tidy as you might like. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use a product called Stitch. It's H2O. It's basically a water-soluble topper. You can see how thin it is, okay? And what it has is it's got texture to it so that when we go to put it down, this is going to be on top of what you embroider, and then it's not going to let the bumps pop through, it's not going to let the fuzz pop through, it's going to give you a nice flat base for your stitches to hang on to. Now there are a couple different ways you can put this on, all right? I've actually used spit and touched the four corners and gotten them a little wet and tacked them down, and that holds it in place until I can do a basting. You can also, as long as it's way out on the edge, just stick pins in the far outside corners so that you can, it will hold it down. Now, if your machine has a basting function, I recommend that as soon as you get this on your machine, you run a basting stitch around this, and then you can take your pins out. Just make sure the basting stitch isn't going to run into one of your pins. You want to make sure those pins are out of the way. You can always, you know, if you're going to do the basting, you don't even really have to pin it. You can just kind of hold it in place. But this is going to control your nap so that you don't have to worry about the stitches looking uneven and not so pretty, okay? Now, what I want to also show you is, and I don't think I explained this in the last, the reason we use this is so that our hoop doesn't slide all over the place while we're trying to hoop something, okay? What I want to show you is, and I'm going to pop this back out, what happens if I hoop minky, okay? Because this is kind of like velvet or minky, and what I want to show you is that we don't ever really want to put this in the hoop in our ideal way that we showed you earlier. If I just spray that a little bit, and the reason I want to show you this is because we don't often think about this, and it can happen with t-shirts, it can happen with just about anything if you get your hoop too tight. But when you're working with a nap, oftentimes, if I do this, and I'm winging this because I've never actually shown this before, but I'm just going to pop this in, okay? And so this looks like it'd be nice and easy. And I'm showing you this because I want, and hopefully in the video we can put a big red X over this, because then I would put my topper on there and I would be ready to stitch, okay? And you could, and actually stitching on Minky, you could put a beautiful name or monogram or design on here. But what I'm hoping I'm going to show you is, especially the longer it's in, if when I take this out, do you see the hoop ring on there now? Okay, you may or may not be able to get that out, okay? So if I play with it, I might be able to steam it, but can you still see the outline of the hoop in here? That's going to happen with velvet, it's going to happen with suede, anything where it's going to make a permanent crease where that hoop was. And so we can't always hoop that way. We can't always put it in the hoop. So the alternative to that is to use a product that we call Stable Stick or Sticky Stabilizer, okay? So I'm going to show you one way to use this. I'm going to put this down, and this is hard to hoop because it's got this paper on it that makes it super slippery. And I'm going to pop that in there, okay? And I'm going to tighten it down. Now we all know how hard it is, once you've hooped for a while, working with these and trying to tighten them is really hard. So on a Bernina hoop, oftentimes what I do is I buy these little things you put on kids' pencils so they don't hurt to write. And if I cut them in half, you can put them on this, and it makes it easier to tighten. On a baby lock hoop, we have these wonderful this wonderful screwdriver that fits right in. Not on the multi-needle. Oh, there it went. And it, yeah, and then you can use that and it gives you leverage, and it works on all the baby hoops too. Okay, so I've got my stabilizer hooped. Now with sticky stabilizer, I can just take a pin, not a pen, or anything sharp, and I pull that, and now this is sticky, okay? So if I wanted to now use something like this, if I wanted to embroider on this, I would bring this over, and obviously I'd have my place marked where I wanted to stitch, and I would put this on top like this. So I'm not actually crushing the nap in the hoop between the two layers. Then I could put my topper on here, and I would be ready to stitch like this, okay? So when you're working with things like this that you can't really put in the hoop, the sticky stabilizer is a good option. Sometimes I will put my regular stabilizer in and just spray the top with 505 and put it down, and it will hold it well enough. But the sticky also works really well to help hold things, okay? Now, where else with sticky, whenever we get into hard to hoop things, the sticky stabilizer becomes more important, all right? So let's look at some of our options. I talked earlier about what if I had a quilt label and I wanted to embroider it, how would I do that? Well, sticky stabilizer works great for that because I can just put it down and now it's holding it in place. And I would probably still baste it before I started filling in or stitching whatever I wanted to, but it is nice and it's held in place and it works really well. So we can do this. Ideally, we always want the item hooped if we can, but there's lots of times you can't, and this would work really well. Obviously, without the four sides controlled in the hoop, your density is going to matter. You don't want to put a super dense something on this like this because it will be able to pull it in, which again is why whenever I lay something on top, I not only depend on the sticky, I also baste it in so that it's held nice and tight. Okay? Now, let's look at bags for a minute. Wouldn't it be nice if all bags came like this? So that they were nice and easy to hoop. We can hoop this the traditional way. This is a blank sold by Kimberbell so that you can do your embroidery and then you put it together, right sides together, and you stitch up the two sides and voila, you have a bag and you can put a nice big design on it, okay? Not all bags come like this. We buy lots of bags, we're given lots of bags. So here's a bag that I got commercially. Now, the good news is if you want to do a really large design, this bag does have a seam in it. So if I needed to, I could open up the side. Little work, you probably, if you really want to open it totally, have to take the hem out here, open it up, and then open the seam. You might be able to just open the seam and accomplish what you need to accomplish. And I did this in a class. Now, if you have a multi-needle, this is where you have the advantage. Because with a multi-needle, you have that small arm, and you don't have to open anything. You're going to slide this right into the machine, and you're going to be able to put it down and stitch right on it. But we don't all have multi-needles, and so we have to have a way on our domestic machines to do this. So believe it or not, the easiest way to do this is to turn it inside out. And you'll see why here in just a second. All right, you got to control your straps, so you want to get those pinned out of the way. But you will mark where you want to embroider, and again, we're going to depend on this sticky stabilizer. I'm just going to toss these over here for the moment. We're going to depend on the sticky stabilizer, and we're going to lay this down so that the X or the cross where we want to stitch is in the hoop. And I'm going to smooth this down, okay? And then I should have drawn the cross on it so you could see it. I'm going to smooth this down. I'm going to use my template to check that I've got it in there straight. And then I'm going to do whatever I have to do, whether I use clips or pins to hold this back so that I can now put this on the hoop and I would stitch here. And that way, Otherwise, if I had it right side out, I would have to be holding this up in the air to be able to stitch here. So turning it inside out works really great. Okay, and so that's how I would do a bag. Now, what if I needed to do a baby onesie? Okay, some of these are so tiny. I'm going to reach for this one. This one is a newborn size. Okay. And, you know, this is just one of those things that you're going to struggle with a little bit. The larger it is, the easier it is to get in. But again, this is one where if we turn it inside out, we have an easier time hooping it. So if I turn this inside out, all right, and I've already got a design on there, and that's where I want to stitch, I can go ahead and you just want to line this up, and you're going to get that over the sticky as best. And these are really easy to stretch, so you have to be very gentle with the way you put them down. Okay. And then I'm going to hold it down, and I'm going to pull this open. And then you can see, again, I'm going to need clips or pins or some way to hold this away. And you'll see some pictures in the presentation I do on different ways people do that. But this is how you would now be able to embroider on this, and you would keep this open. Okay? So whether you're doing a couple of just recap things, whether you're doing things that are closed or whatever, everything needs a stabilizer. The only exception to that is if you're quilting and you're hooping the 3 layers. Other than that, you need a stabilizer. That stabilizer needs to be completely one piece in the hoop. You cannot use your scraps and tape them and pin them together. It needs to be good and solid, okay? If you can hoop both the item and the stabilizer, it's going to give you your best result. But if you can't, you can either hoop your stabilizer a full piece and spray it with 505, or you can use sticky stabilizer. This comes in both tear away, cut away, and melt away. And then you can place your items on it, okay? It's sometimes you just have to turn into a pretzel to get a certain item on there. But you can embroider most everything. The only thing I avoid like the plague are Christmas stockings. They are, you know, usually if they're pre-made, they're tight at the top. If they've got the fur, you pretty much have to dismantle the stocking to embroider it, and that's okay. You can do that, but I wouldn't agree to do 10 of them because you'll pull your hair out trying to do that. Now we're going to stop and splice the next part in. If you have a Bernina, you have a little trick I want to show you that only a Bernina can do. So I'll be right back. Okay, so the last thing I want to show you is if you have a machine that allows you access to your free arm when you embroider. Now, I know that Baby Lock does not. Your multi-needles do. You can put things right on the free arm. But the Bernina does, and most people don't know how this works. And the advantage of this is, rather than having to turn things that are tubes upside down, you can actually use your free arm and save a lot of pretzel making. Now, the trick to this is it has to be open at both ends. It has to be a tube, okay? So you can see I have an opening here and an opening here, because your hoop's coming in from one direction and this has to go over the free arm. So unless you opened up a hole in a bag, this wouldn't work. But this works with t-shirts and sweatshirts and baby onesies. I wanted to show you with the smallest baby onesie. On this one I have the baby hoop because it is something really small. I'm going to slide it inside of here. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually turn this and go the other way, is I am actually going to run this in on the free arm, okay, like this, all right? And then, let me see, it's actually easier if I put it on the hoop first. With women's t-shirt, any t-shirt and sweatshirts, it's a little easier because you're not working in such a small space, but it's all very doable. Now I'm going to slide the bottom on the free arm, and get this all the way up. I don't have my embroidery foot on, so the needle is kind of catching on here. All right. And then I'm going to put that on. Temporarily take that needle out so that I can position this. Now I can slide this around, and you can see my little cross there. Once I have that lined up, make sure. Now I trimmed a lot of this excess stabilizer off on the edges so that I wouldn't have to fight with it. And then once I get this where I want it, it needs to come over a little bit. I can smooth it down and I can line up my letter. So I would take my little template and make sure that was as straight as possible, make sure I hadn't stretched it out. But if you look on the screen, I do want to point out, notice that my L is going this way, but the head and the neck of my onesie is this way. So don't forget that oftentimes when you're doing these things, you have to rotate your design. Now my design is the top of the letter is at the top of the thing, and I can come back in here and I can do a check, and it is going to, I can go to the four corners, oops, and make sure everything is lined up, and I can put my needle in the center, and if my needle was in here I could verify that that was lined up, which it's not, and I would have to move the design a little bit. But that's okay, you can do that. But isn't that cool that you don't have to turn it inside out, that you can just slide it over your free arm? And this is the smallest onesie, well, I think they have a preemie size, but this is the smallest onesie they make. And I've got it on here and I'm going to be able to embroider it without having to hold it. So that's how you can use your free arm to embroider.